Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest episode of Tales from Outer Space, taken from the subreddit HFY. The links to all the stories will be down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. And if you do, please consider subscribing. Story number 1, Penal Colony, written by Vincia Ort Mariah. Surveyor's personal log, transcribed from dictaphone recordings and submitted for the consideration of the United Galactic Federation Council in addendum to the official report. The planet designated DW-953 is a penal colony. How else do you account for the presence of a sentient species on a death world? The gravity alone would crush 70% of known sentient species as soon as they deactivated their ship's inertial dampeners, and would cripple or severely impair the other 30%. Not to mention the rampant tectonic and volcanic activity, the poisonous toxins, the deadly predators, or the fact that the planet is so tilted on its axis that nearly the entire habitable surface of the planet vacillates wildly between temperatures extremes over the course of a single standard cycle. And all of that is secondary to the fact that the ancestor forsaken rock is blasted with near-lethal levels of solar radiation. From the yellow sun, no less. No sentient species could possibly have ever evolved under those terrestrial conditions, let alone beneath the scorching glare of the unshielded fission reactor like the system's star. That was the analysis of the original surveying team sent from the Council to the United Galactic Federation. Further analysis of the cultural and technological artifacts conducted by our team has confirmed the original speculation. The entire prison seems to be run by a collection of gangs, whose power and prominence within the prison population is directly correlated to the amount of territory, resources, and population they control. The larger gangs have made attempts to self-regulate, understanding the disadvantages of prolonged conflict. Major clashes appear to be genocidal in nature, waged with the intent of subsuming or utterly destroying the enemy entirely. The attempt to self-regulate has thus far been hampered by violent tendencies of the deviant individuals sentenced to life on the penal world. Minor scuffles between the rival gangs as a constant occurrence, and fairly accepted by the majority of inmates. These conflicts are waged with a disregard for the habitability of the planet itself, in some cases leaving swaths of otherwise habitable territory completely barren of sentient life. It is when looking at the recreational activities of these inmates that we may get a glimpse of the offences for which they were exiled from their native civilization, as their pursuits are nearly all violent in one form or another. There is a peculiar popular spectacle of gladiatorial nature in which participants don armor to simulate small-scale battles, complete with unarmed combat over the possession of an object that appears to be an inflated bladder of an animal. There are varying forms of this type of gladiatorial contest, each with its own set of rules, both with and without varying levels of weapons and armaments permitted. Another particularly confusing and exceptionally violent form of contest takes place in a field of ice, with the participants wielding clubs, while balanced on blades strapped to their feet at the end of their legs. These are just a few of the most salient examples, enumerating all forms of recreational violence pursued by these inmates. Even in passing, it would take hours, suffice to say that they are many, varied, and disturbing. Technologically, the denizens of this present world show a desperate desire to escape the harsh conditions of their confinement. Implements gathered by the UGF surveying teams show no evidence of FTL technology or anti-gravity capability. Instead, the inmates have repeatedly bolted cockpits on top of several tons of highly unstable chemical accelerants and ignited the entire contraption. But shockingly, they managed this successfully more than once. Naturally, there have been some predictable consequences, yet the remainder of the inmates seem to be resolute in their chosen course. This action merely proves how desperate these prisoners are to escape their confinement. The manufacturing process utilized by these societies shows a disregard for the ecosystem of the prison world. This may be taken as evidence that the inmates wish to leave the planet, even at the cost of destroying their prison behind them. Given the conditions of such a hostile world, one can hardly blame them. Despite the mountain of circumstantial evidence compiled both here and enumerated more fully in the official report, I must confess to a nagging doubt. We have as yet to find any evidence of out-of-system monitoring of the prison. My colleagues have advanced the theory that the civilization responsible for establishing this penal world may have trusted the world's high gravity and the inmates' lack of technological prowess to keep the prisoners bound to the hell world of rock perpetually. This is a reasonable theory. However, I can't help but feel the same short-sighted course of action for a civilization capable of colonizing worlds outside of its native star system. Also, there is a matter of the planet's civilization. No evidence of an FTL-capable civilization colonizing this arm of the galaxy has yet to be found. It is true that there remain large swaths of territory in this region of the galactic halo still to be mapped, but inroads are being made daily, and still no evidence has appeared. Officially, the surveying team has advanced a single, cohesive theory, replete with evidence, and the DW-953 is a penal world in all of its official reports. There is, however, another possibility that has remained unspoken since the beginning of our investigation. It is possibly so horrifying on its implications that we are loath to even speak it aloud amongst ourselves. It is possible that there is no parent civilization, that the species we have encountered on this planet designated DW-953, locally known as Earth, evolved to sentience on the most hostile planet yet found to support life, and that species, for whom violence is a form of leisure, who rose to dominance from the deadliest environment yet encountered by the UGF, is coming. This is, of course, a mere speculation, which, as the leader of the expedition, I am duty-bound to present to the UGF Council. It strains the credulity to believe that any species could have evolved to sentience under such harsh conditions, and is outright laughable to believe that any sentient species could demonstrate such wanton violence towards other members of the same species, or such flagrant disregard for their homeworld. I expect the expeditionary teams to contact the parent civilization of DW-953 Prison World any day now. Earth is a penal colony, right? Then to story number 1. Story number 2. The Inbetweeners, written by 6E6F6E2D6269E617279. Afternoon, Mr. Patel, said Dave, smiling at the old shopkeeper. How much are you charging for the pick and mix these days? Shilling and a handful, same as ever, said Mr. Patel. Dave took 2 paper bags and filled them with rhubarb and custard, his favorite. He put a crown on the counter. My hands are bigger these days. Keep the change. Me and Jim, we used to pinch these when we thought you weren't looking, he said, ashamed. I know, said Mr. Patel. Your mum came by once a week and paid what you took. They're on me. Dave laughed. Somehow he knew Mum would have been one step ahead. All right, give us a smoke and we'll call it quits. Mr. Patel took a crumpled pack from his pocket and opened it. Last one, you promise me? Dave grinned slyly and lit the cigarette, inhaling deeply. Mr. Patel did the same. The 2 men smoked in silence for a while. I don't think that I'll ever see you again, Mr. Patel, said Dave. At least not for a while. We've sold the house, off to the shuttle tomorrow. I heard, said Mr. Patel gently. The whole family, unless I'm ill-informed. Dave nodded. Never been tempted, Mr. Patel. Last I heard, they didn't have a cricket in space. Mr. Patel pointed his finger at Dave. No proper cricket anyway, and that new format is never going to catch on. There was no arguing, and Dave knew it. He smiled and listened to the well-rehearsed tirade. Goodbye, Mr. Patel. I'll send you a letter from Station 5. Dave held out a hand. Goodbye, David, Mr. Patel shook it. Please do, and say hello to Jim for me. I will, said Dave, picking up the sweets as he turned to leave. The door stuck as it always did, and the bell rang as it always had. Dave walked slowly down the street he knew so well, Mr. Oneshot had seen so far from home when his mum had first asked him to fetch milk, maybe 30 years ago. Hungover in his teens, he thought the same, only to lure the bacon enough to get him out of bed. But he'd grown up and learned to drive. Towns he barely knew from away games in school team were suddenly 10 minutes away, and now they were off to Station 5, light years from Earth, though they'd be there in days. He waited at the junction as a car went past. He looked up at the end of the terrace, the late summer sun setting the red brick ablaze, and of course holly in the grass in crude chalk. It had been there for so long that no one could remember who holly was. Now it was designated as an intangible cultural heritage of the UNESCO protected. Half of 100 steps further and he was home. He let himself in and went into the living room. The furniture was gone, of course, and the house felt bigger than it had since he was a small boy. He stopped at the door to the kitchen and looked at the frame. They were all there, names and dates etched in so closely together that you'd struggle to make out any sense of it, unless you knew what you were looking for. He bent down, and there it was. David, 3rd of March, 2034. He remembered standing as high as he could, remembered the sound of the book sliding down on the frame to rest on his head, and the guilty duck away, as Mum had drawn the line in pencil. Other names were there, of course, but his was first. "I'm amazed you made 5 feet, let alone 6 feet, said Jim from the kitchen. He was holding a mug of tea. There was a thermos on his side. "Fancy a brew? I'll not taste the same up there," he said. "Yeah, all right," said Dave, producing a bag of rhubarb and custard for the trip. Jim smiled. "Mum's out back," he said, gesturing with the mug. "Think we'll all wanted to say goodbye to the place. Gonna miss it, right enough." Dave poured some tea, added some milk, and followed Jim into the yard. Mum was looking at the empty pigeon coop. The pigeons had been released at Dad's funeral and a fortnight ago, crapped on the coffin and disappeared. "I hope you didn't think that I'm pushing you," said Mum, "but I want to see space before I, you know." She turned to them, lifting a hand to empty washing line. "Also, the UNESCO protected. I'll miss the flowers. We've always had flowers, but I feel like it's time. Like, if we stay, we'll become part of this, museum they're making." Dave and Jim nodded silently. "I wish it wasn't this way," said Dave. "It's easy for the Spacers. They left everything behind without a second thought. Easy for the Earthers. They never look up. But for us, the Inbetweeners," he trailed off. "Imagine never tasting bittersweet," said Jim. "It tears at your heart, 'cause you have a place you call home and dreams you'll never fulfill unless you leave." He finished his tea, pouring the dregs of it down the drain. "Who's for a final pint at the White Rose?" End of story. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you did, please consider subscribing. If you wish to support the author, there is a link to the original story, so pop over there and give him your support. If you wish to support this channel, however, there are a few ways to do so. The best and easiest would be to share this video with other people, as well as liking, subscribing, and leaving a comment. All of these things tell the algorithm that this channel is at least vaguely interesting, and that may share it with other people. If you wish to support the channel in some other manner, watching my other videos would also help tremendously. Or, if you really like, there is a link down below to leave a tip or to join the Patreon. Any and all support is very much appreciated. And I hope that you all have a good one until the next time, and I'll see you then. Cheers.